That was the big thing is, okay, I want to heal fully. I want to live an embodied faith. I want to live the abundant life. I don't want to be stuck with some of this stuff forever. We did not know it was abusive, but marriage counseling does not work if there's abuse involved. And I remember coming back in and I was like, this describes my situation. And she said, yeah, your marriage is abusive. And I said, why hasn't somebody told me that before? She goes, I don't know, but I'm telling you now.
Kathy, thank you so much for coming today and willing to share your story. I'm excited to share this with people and to help people, just maybe see a sense of hope in a situation that they may not feel hope now. And I think your story is powerful, and I think it's going to help a lot of people. So thanks for saying yes and being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. I've known you for a long time, and I trust you completely. And so it really is an honor. I've been really praying about this, that this will be meaningful. The right people will hear it.
Absolutely.
And respond in a way that honors God and challenges them.
Yeah, I knew you before you were married.
Yes.
So it's been a while. It has been a while. So let's kind of start off and just tell people kind of your story, the background, how you got to where you are today.
Okay. Well, so I want to kind of give an educational portion of my life.
Absolutely.
Because I want to debunk the myth that abused women are poorly educated, lower income, women who can easily be taken advantage of, things like that. That's just not accurate. So my background, I went to the University of Oklahoma, got my bachelor's, worked for a couple of different companies after I graduated, then went on staff with the Biblical Counseling Ministry where I met you. I was there on staff for 16 years with them. Left that, I did homeschool all of my kids some of the time and some of my kids all of the time. So 3 of them graduated through me. About 4 or 5 years ago, I began kind of doing some more educational stuff. I took a leadership class online through Harvard edX. I did an emotions class through UC Berkeley and realized I could do that. I could keep learning. I loved it. I loved the things that I was learning, the new research that had caught up and stuff with some of the things that you and I had learned a long time ago.
Yeah.
So I went back for my master's and graduated with my master's. It's in the mental health field. I got a broad degree because I was very intentional about what I wanted to do. And so I picked a degree that allowed me to choose most of my own classes. And so I focused on trauma and grief. I've always had an interest in trauma and how that affects people.
Sure.
And I began to see what a huge piece of healing from trauma grief work is. Now, I had no idea how big, but did that during my master's. Like in my grief class, I wrote a research paper on grief and abuse. I wrote a research paper on grief and divorce. During my trauma classes, I wrote in one of them PTSD from abuse. So I really began honing in. I was very intentional in what I did. And then I became a certified trauma-informed mental health coach and have done a lot more study on abuse, coercive control, narcissistic and emotional abuse, and abuse in the church.
It's a lot.
Yes, so I went back, I was like, I wanted to figure this thing out. I wanted to know what had happened.
Well, it's so cool you could kind of pick your classes too and pick areas that you were really interested in and wanted to focus on and pour into that.
Yeah, I wasn't learning just for the sake of learning.
Right.
I really wanted to know what research has said, I won't get off on this too much, but with the invention of the fMRI, we have so much more understanding of neurobiology and all these things. And so I wanted to see how that was playing into abuse and how that would play into healing. That was the big thing is, okay, I want to heal fully. I want to live an embodied faith. I want to live the abundant life. I don't want to be stuck with some of this stuff forever.
Absolutely. It's a great story and you were motivated to go through all that and
motivated.
do that, and it was worth it.
Yeah, 100%.
So kind of let's talk a little bit about your story and how you got here.
So was married just a little under 35 years. I was married 32 years when I filed for divorce, and then it took 2.5 years for the divorce to come through. I've got 6 wonderful adult children, aged 22 to 33. I've got 3 granddaughters, and divorce was not even in my mind for the first 30 years,
Okay.
probably. So I was not looking for that by any means.
Yeah. Yeah. How did you meet your husband?
At church.
Okay. Okay. So and how long did you guys date before you got married?
Around 2 years. It was not like a quick thing. It was a couple of years, year and a half, couple of years, and then we were engaged for 6 months. So it was a thought out decision.
Was the early part of marriage, was there a good part?
Honestly, no.
Okay.
So had counseling background, and that sounds like a harsh statement, but so let me clarify that. There were obviously good parts of it, so I don't want that to sound as generalized as that does. But I came in with a counseling background, so I knew the areas that we would need to work on. I knew there'd be a lot of communication skills that we were going to need to work on. So I came in ready to roll with all that. And then pretty quickly into the marriage, within the first year, I knew we had trouble. So I had reached out to our minister of discipleship and had told him that there were some things that were really concerning that I knew we needed help with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think, the things that you were looking at going into it, communicate, I mean, those are the kind of things that you would expect going into any marriage, right? And you're thinking, yeah, we don't have it all together. We've got areas that you thought we'll need to work on to get better. But then that all didn't work.
No, that did not. But the typical ways of dealing with those things and the skills building and things like that were not effective.
So when did you really kind of suspect that your marriage was something other than just those normal highs and lows, those normal things that every married couple goes through in the first part of marriage?
Honestly, so the minister of discipleship had met with us. We'd tried to do Bible studies more than one time or do marital counseling, which I will throw in right now. We did not know it was abusive, but marriage counseling does not work if there's abuse involved. I know that now. I knew nothing was ever being resolved.
Yes.
Which is a really key thing. But with marriage counseling, when there's abuse going on, as a general rule, you've only got one person who's really working on things.
Right.
So the other person's a spectator. The abused person does not have the safety to share the things that they need to share. Because the person's right there, and you've got to remember, I've got to go home with him.
Yeah, you got to sleep with this guy. Yeah.
Also, the things that are pointed out, because we're both sinners, there were things that I was doing that were sinful, that were wrong, that were damaging to the marriage. They were not causing the abuse, but they were damaging to the marriage, and so I'm being called on the carpet on my things, which I should be. That's godly confrontation. I have no problem with that. I own those things, but those things can be weaponized against you. And even like when you do marriage counseling, sometimes it's preferences where maybe, so she gets up every morning after him and she doesn't always make the bed and he really wants the bed made,
right.
Which is, it's not unreasonable, right? So little things like that. Well then, so that maybe that comes out in counseling, and then so it's like, well, you're supposed to make the bed. So I'm using that to pick something that's not sinful, because that isn't a sin
that
thing.
Would come back on you, though.
So things can be weaponized against you because they're hearing everything. The blame shifting is really big with abuse, and so things get put back on you. Then a counselor can be looking at the two things, and because you have two sinners dealing with things, it's like, well, she's doing stuff too. The biggest thing on that is who has the power. So that, because it's not abusive when she's sinning in the relationship, that's not necessarily abuse. She doesn't, I'm again generalizing, but most of the time it's being the female. She does not have the power in the relationship. He's not scared of her. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
But marriage
she's
counseling,
scared of him.
yeah, and with reason. So marriage counseling is not effective and can actually be really harmful in abuse situations. It just kind of drives things, keeps things going on, and then all those other pieces are in there. But didn't know it was abusive. So we've gone on through marriage counseling off and on for several years, for a decade. And it was maybe 15 years into the marriage where I have my mentor, who was a biblical counselor, and we'd been meeting weekly, and at some point she had me read a book on abuse. And I remember coming back in, and I was like, this describes my situation. And she said, yeah, your marriage is abusive. And I said, why hasn't somebody told me that before? She goes, I don't know, but I'm telling you now. So that was the first time the word abuse had been used. A solid 15 years probably into the marriage was the first time I'd heard that. And I want to hit on that again because I was a trained counselor.
Yeah.
But that was not something we were talking about, and it was definitely not something I was trained in.
No, I think, you and I did a lot of school stuff at the same time, the early part of it, and that really wasn't anything that you really talked about a lot, because I think a lot of it wasn't as hot, it wasn't a hot topic really at that time, and so we didn't deal with it a lot. So did he go with you to counseling? Did he agree to go?
With the minister of discipleship, yes, we met together a number of times, and it was interesting because my thing, he would say something that I needed to deal with, and I would say, okay, then I'll work on that.
Sure.
In our situation, my husband's issues tend to be more viewed as passivity. And I could look at it now and say, well, it's stonewalling.
Sure.
It all goes to the power and control issue. But it leaned more toward, well, you need to try and be more whatever. And mine was sin. And
yours was bam, bam, bam.
Yeah, his was passivity. I don't think that was intentional, but that is the way it came out.
Yeah.
And then with our Christian counselor, my mentor, she met with us a few months. And there was never any resolution and I know you shouldn't use never, nothing was ever resolved. There was not okay, we dealt with that, that's great. Let's move on to something else.
And he never really saw that he had a problem.
Correct.
It was really, I'll go for you because you need to get fixed.
Yeah.
It's your fault, right? And once they fix you, then we'll be okay.
Yeah, it gave him an opportunity at times to say some pretty painful things.
In counseling. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's interesting, and just that, I definitely agree with everything you said about how it can be detrimental. I've seen that, and I think I've learned more, and I know now, I think more to not put someone in that situation, do some things early on to see if both people are really committed, why they're there, and those kind of things. But it's so easy to not, because most people that are narcissistic are really good at it. And I think it's easy for them to paint themselves as, I'm just the good guy here. Would you get her fixed? So we'll be okay. Yeah,
you kind of have this idea of, well, if she could fix all these things, then I wouldn't be this way.
Right.
And that's the blame shifting. And it was interesting because a dear friend of mine was talking about, she grew up in a narcissistic and emotionally abusive home. And she was telling me recently, she remembers, she's in her late 30s now, telling her mom one time, because her dad would throw these angry fits and say horrible things and stuff, and he would say, he'd get mad because she did such and such, whatever it was. And she remembers telling her Mom, if you would just stop doing that, Daddy won't get mad anymore. And of course now she realizes, no, he would have switched to something else, and that was never even the issue, which is a real concern when you get into couples counseling. Yeah, that's a good point, because you said, okay, so first counselor and identifying some areas that you were supposed to work on, sin areas. And so as you worked on that and improved in that area, that never made anything better. Then he found new things to bring up. Is that true? Yes, and I've seen that so many times now with different friends of mine who've gone through the same situation. Again, it's the blame shifting. And so they say, well, maybe you don't keep the house clean enough, so you start keeping the house cleaner.
Right.
Doesn't change anything. If you have a job, you work too much, so you start, okay, I'll take Wednesdays off.
Nothing
Doesn't change
changes.
things. Whatever that thing is, the line is always changing. The bar
Yeah.
is always moving because it all goes back to power and control.
Right. And so if you're being compliant, well, there's got to be something else they find wrong.
Yes.
Or another rung on the ladder. Well,
Yes.
you did that. Counts as better, but, and so you keep going with those things.
Yep.
So why did you stay when you knew it was unhealthy? When did you finally decide, I guess, that when you heard the word abuse 15 years in, when did you, when you really realized that not only do we have problems, but this is a big problem. This is abuse.
Yes. So that was really meaningful when she pointed that out. Now, it will come back in a minute, but she did not believe that abuse was biblical grounds for divorce. That was really significant. So I went on after she had diagnosed that, had made that comment before, and so that was helpful. It was validating, for sure.
Sure.
I knew what I was dealing with. And then I don't even remember who, but somehow I got the power and control wheel, which you can Google power and control wheel, and it'll show up easily. And so I went through it, and the interesting thing with it, it has 8 different sections. And all of them, though, lead to the hub, which is power and control. So the heart of abuse is power and control. Everything else is tactics. They're strategies. And then on the outside of the wheel actually is physical or sexual violence.
Okay.
Because all these things, though, are abusive without that. And oftentimes if the man can get you to be compliant without those things, there's been a long-standing comment about never leave a mark. If I can pull it off without leaving a mark, that's very effective.
Go to the extreme part of it.
Yes. So these were some of the things when I got the wheel and was looking at it. There was one on using emotional abuse, which again, emotional abuse was a new topic for us, right?
Sure.
We weren't trained in that kind of idea. Right. And so here's some of the tactics. Putting her down, making her feel bad about herself, calling her names, making her think she's crazy, playing mind games, humiliating her, making her feel guilty. Another section, minimizing, denying, and blaming. Making light of the abuse and not taking her concerns about it seriously. Saying the abuse didn't happen. Shifting responsibility for abusive behavior. Saying she caused it. And then there's a section using economic abuse, which that was a new one to me. Most abuse situations have some financial component to them.
Okay.
Again, the power and control. Making her ask for money, giving her allowance, taking her money, not letting her know about or have access to family income. So that was 3 out of 8. So I read those, and it was actually...
Those all fit.
Oh, yeah. And it was it was a lot overwhelming, leaning towards terrifying, because I couldn't figure out how somebody knew all that stuff.
So, they've been sneaking around my house, right?
So I looked into the wheel more, and it's like, how on earth did they create this? They actually took victim stories, abuse victim stories, and compiled the data from hearing them. So as opposed to coming in and saying, I think this is what abuse looks like, as a researcher.
Right.
Went the other way around. Everyone tell us your stories, and then what are the common threads? What are the commonalities? And so that was another really helpful point of, okay, these are tactics. Again, that's kind of the idea of, well, you change your work schedule, you keep the house cleaner, you cook his favorite meals, whatever the thing is, it just keeps changing because it's all about power and control.
Right. And so that was really eye-opening when you began to see that and to see those things and realizing that they didn't make this just for me.
Yeah.
There are other people that have gone through that, but things that you never would have considered abuse. Because I think most of the time, probably when we think of abuse, we think of physical, which my experience is, sure, that's horrible, it's awful. But the emotional, the finance, things like that, the control that comes with those things. Where I had a client one time, and she couldn't spend $5 on her debit card without contacting her husband, because if she did, it was hell to pay.
Yes.
And so you get
Yeah.
trained that way, very much so.
Yeah.